when my sister Jessica told me to pack my bags and get out of the house I had been paying the mortgage on for 3 years. She thought she held all the cards because she was married with kids and I was single. She assumed I would just roll over and hand her the keys to the property I had sacrificed everything to save from foreclosure. What she did not expect was for me to take those keys with me when I left, and for her to discover that her name was never on the deed in the first place. This is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people closest to you will try to take everything you have worked for, and why standing up for yourself is not selfish. It is survival. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rachel Morrison, and I am 32 years old. 3 years ago, I made a decision that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of my life and test every relationship I held dear. At the time, it seemed like the only reasonable choice available to someone who valued family loyalty above personal comfort. Looking back, I recognize it as the beginning of a journey that would teach me the difference between genuine love and manipulative exploitation. The story begins with a phone call that arrived on a Tuesday evening in October. I was sitting in my modest apartment in Portland, Oregon, reviewing financial statements for the nonprofit where I worked as a program coordinator. The apartment was small but comfortable, decorated with thrift store finds and plants that I had nursed back to health from the clearance sections of various garden centers. It represented financial stability and personal independence that I had worked steadily to achieve since graduating from college with a degree in social work. The caller was my father, David Morrison, and his voice carried the weight of desperation that I had learned to recognize during my childhood. Our family had experienced financial instability throughout my formative years, largely due to my father's struggles with maintaining steady employment, and my mother's ongoing health issues that prevented her from working consistently. These challenges had created a family dynamic where financial crises were met with collective problem-solving efforts, often requiring individual sacrifice for the greater good of maintaining family stability. Dad explained that he and Mom were facing foreclosure on the family home where I had grown up in suburban Seattle. The house represented more than just property to our family. It contained decades of memories, served as the gathering place for holidays and celebrations, and provided my parents with their only significant asset for retirement security. The mortgage payments had become overwhelming due to reduced hours at Dad's construction job and increasing medical expenses related to Mom's diabetes management. The foreclosure timeline provided only 90 days to resolve the situation before the bank would seize the property. Traditional refinancing options were unavailable due to my parents' credit history and debt-to-income ratios. Selling the house quickly would likely result in a significant loss due to market conditions and the urgent timeline, leaving my parents with insufficient funds to secure alternative housing in their familiar neighborhood. During that phone conversation, Dad outlined several potential solutions that the family had discussed. My older sister Jessica and her husband Michael had considered helping, but their own mortgage payments and expenses related to raising 2 young children made substantial financial assistance impossible. My younger brother Thomas was completing his final year of law school and carried significant student loan debt that prevented him from contributing meaningfully to the solution. The option that emerged as most viable involved me relocating to the family home and taking over the mortgage payments while my parents remained as residents. This arrangement would prevent foreclosure while allowing my parents to maintain their living situation and neighborhood connections. For me, it would mean leaving my apartment, my established life in Portland, and my proximity to friends and professional networks that I had spent years developing. The financial analysis was straightforward but sobering. The monthly mortgage payment was nearly twice what I was paying for my apartment rent. Property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs would add additional expenses that stretched my budget to its absolute limits. Emergency repairs or unexpected expenses would require eliminating discretionary spending entirely, and potentially accessing credit cards or personal loans that I had worked hard to avoid throughout my adult life. Despite these challenges, the arrangement offered certain advantages that made it financially feasible. I would build equity in real estate rather than paying rent without ownership benefits. The larger living space would allow me to establish a home office that could support freelance consulting work to supplement my nonprofit salary. Most importantly, I would be helping my parents maintain stability during a vulnerable period in their lives when other options were extremely limited. The decision-making process extended over several weeks and involved numerous family conversations about expectations, responsibilities, and long-term implications. Jessica, who lived in Denver with her family, strongly supported the plan and expressed gratitude that I was willing to make such a significant sacrifice for our parents' welfare. Thomas appreciated that the arrangement would prevent family crisis during his final semester of law school, allowing him to focus on completing his degree and bar examination preparation. My parents approached the conversation with evident reluctance to burden me with their financial difficulties, combined with genuine appreciation for my willingness to consider such a substantial commitment. They emphasized that the arrangement would be temporary, lasting only until they could improve their financial situation or identify alternative long-term housing solutions. They also offered to contribute whatever amount they could manage toward household expenses and maintenance costs. The legal and financial arrangements required consultation with attorneys and mortgage professionals to ensure proper documentation and protection for all parties involved. The mortgage transfer process proved complex, requiring extensive documentation of my income, employment history, and creditworthiness. The bank required comprehensive financial disclosures and proof of my ability to sustain the mortgage payments over the long term. One critical element of the arrangement involved updating the property deed to reflect my ownership stake in exchange for assuming the mortgage obligation. This legal protection ensured that my financial investment would be recognized through property ownership rather than simply providing rental payments to my parents. The attorney explained that this documentation would be essential for protecting my interests and ensuring that my substantial financial contribution would be preserved regardless of future changes in family circumstances. The transition from my Portland apartment to the family home in Seattle required careful planning and significant emotional adjustment. Leaving the independent life I had established meant giving up proximity to friends, familiar routines, and the sense of personal autonomy that comes with maintaining one's own household. The move also required finding new employment or arranging remote work with my current employer to maintain income stability. Fortunately, my supervisor at the nonprofit understood the family circumstances and approved a remote work arrangement that allowed me to maintain my position while relocating. This arrangement required establishing a functional home office and adapting to new communication patterns with colleagues and clients, but it preserved the income stability necessary for managing the mortgage obligations. The physical move involved transporting my accumulated possessions from a one-bedroom apartment to a much larger house, where I would occupy my childhood bedroom while my parents continued using the master bedroom and primary living spaces. This arrangement required negotiating shared spaces, privacy boundaries, and household responsibilities in ways that honored both my new financial obligations and my parents' continuing residence in their longtime home. The first months of this new living arrangement revealed both the benefits and challenges of the decision I had made. Financial pressure was constant and required strict budgeting that eliminated most discretionary spending. Social isolation became problematic, as my established friend networks were no longer geographically accessible, and building new relationships proved difficult while managing work and family obligations. However, the arrangement also provided unexpected rewards that had not been apparent during the initial decision-making process. Spending daily time with my parents allowed me to develop deeper adult relationships with them that had not been possible during previous phases of my life. I gained appreciation for their wisdom, humor, and resilience that I had not fully recognized while living independently. The home improvement projects that became necessary due to deferred maintenance during my parents' financial struggles provided opportunities for learning new skills and taking pride in enhancing the property value. These projects also created shared activities with my father that strengthened our relationship while addressing practical needs. Most importantly, the experience taught me about the satisfaction that comes from making difficult decisions based on values rather than convenience. While the financial sacrifice was substantial and the lifestyle changes were challenging, I felt genuine pride in being able to prevent family crisis through my own efforts and resources. The arrangement had been in place for 6 months when Jessica made her first extended visit to the house since I had moved in. She arrived with her husband Michael and their 2 children for a week-long stay during spring break, planning to spend time with our parents while giving their children opportunities to connect with their grandparents. During that visit, Jessica made several observations about improvements I had made to the property, and seemed surprised by the extent to which I had invested time and resources in enhancing the home's condition and appearance. She commented positively on the updated kitchen fixtures, the landscaping improvements I had completed, and the general sense of improved maintenance and care throughout the property. However, I also noticed subtle signs of tension or discomfort that Jessica exhibited during the visit. She seemed to view some of my improvements and living arrangements as presumptuous or overly permanent for what had been described as a temporary solution to our parents' financial crisis. These concerns were not expressed directly during the visit, but they were evident through her body language and occasional comments about the changes I had made. The visit concluded with expressions of gratitude from Jessica for the sacrifices I had made to help our parents, along with assurances that the family appreciated my commitment and recognized the difficulties I had accepted on their behalf. She also mentioned that she and Michael were exploring ways they might be able to contribute more substantially to the household expenses, or eventually take over some of the financial responsibilities I had assumed. Following Jessica's departure, life returned to the routine that I had established with my parents. Work, household maintenance, and family time created a rhythm that felt increasingly natural and sustainable. The financial pressures remained challenging but manageable, and the relationships with my parents continued to deepen in ways that brought genuine satisfaction despite the sacrifices involved. The property value had increased modestly during my residence, and the improvements I had made were enhancing both the living experience and the long-term investment potential. The home office I had established was supporting additional freelance income that helped offset the higher living expenses associated with homeownership versus apartment rental. Most significantly, I was developing confidence in my ability to manage substantial financial responsibilities and make decisions that balanced individual needs with family obligations. The experience was teaching me about personal strength and capability that I had not previously recognized or tested through such significant commitments. As the first year of the arrangement drew to a close, all parties seemed satisfied with how the situation was working. My parents had regained financial stability and were able to remain in their long-time home with dignity intact. I was building equity in real estate while maintaining family relationships and contributing to the collective welfare of people I loved. The temporary arrangement was beginning to feel more permanent as we settled into sustainable patterns that served everyone's needs effectively. This evolution would soon become the source of conflicts that would test every assumption I had made about family loyalty, personal rights, and the true nature of the people closest to me. The foundation I was building through sacrifice and commitment was solid, but it was about to be challenged by forces within my own family that I had never anticipated and was not prepared to confront. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The second year of living in the family home brought subtle shifts in dynamics that initially seemed positive, but would later reveal themselves as the foundation for more significant conflicts. Jessica's visits became more frequent, extending from occasional holiday gatherings to monthly weekend trips that she described as necessary for maintaining close relationships with our parents and ensuring that her children developed strong connections with their grandparents. During these visits, Jessica began expressing increased interest in the improvements I had made to the property and the systems I had established for managing household operations. She would walk through each room, noting the updated fixtures, the fresh paint, the reorganized storage spaces, and the enhanced functionality that resulted from my careful attention to maintenance and improvement projects. Her comments were generally positive, but they carried undertones that suggested she was evaluating the property with an eye toward future possibilities, rather than simply appreciating present conditions. The financial arrangements that had been established during the initial crisis were working effectively for all parties involved. I was managing the mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, and major maintenance expenses, while my parents contributed what they could toward utilities and groceries. The burden was substantial but manageable within my budget, particularly with the supplemental income I had developed through freelance consulting work that utilized the home office space I had created. My parents had experienced significant improvement in their financial situation as the pressure of potential foreclosure lifted and their fixed housing costs became predictable. Dad's construction work had become more steady, and Mom's medical expenses had stabilized through better insurance coverage and improved health management. They were able to rebuild their modest savings and regain a sense of financial security that had been absent during the crisis period. The legal documentation that had been established during the mortgage transfer process provided clear protection for my interests in the property. The deed reflected my ownership stake proportionate to my financial investment, and the mortgage obligations were properly documented in my name. These arrangements had been reviewed by attorneys and were structured to protect all parties, while ensuring that my substantial financial contributions would be preserved regardless of future changes in family circumstances. However, Jessica began making comments that suggested she viewed these legal protections as temporary measures rather than permanent arrangements. During one particularly memorable conversation, she mentioned that she assumed the property would eventually, quote, return to the family when our parents' financial situation improved sufficiently to resume mortgage responsibilities. This comment revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the legal and financial reality of the arrangements that had been established. When I attempted to clarify the permanent nature of my ownership stake and the legal documentation that protected my investment, Jessica seemed surprised and somewhat resistant to accepting this information. She appeared to believe that my financial contributions were more akin to temporary assistance rather than a legitimate transfer of property ownership in exchange for assuming long-term mortgage obligations. These conversations revealed that Jessica had not fully understood or accepted the extent to which the arrangement had permanently altered property ownership and financial responsibilities. Her expectations seemed to be based on the assumption that I was providing temporary financial assistance that would eventually be reversed when circumstances improved, rather than making a permanent investment that transferred ownership rights. The disconnect between Jessica's expectations and the legal reality of the situation created an undercurrent of tension that affected our interactions during her visits. She began making suggestions about property improvements and household arrangements that presumed a level of decision-making authority that was not consistent with her actual legal standing regarding the property. These suggestions often conflicted with my own plans and priorities for the property, creating situations where I needed to assert my ownership rights while attempting to maintain family harmony. Jessica seemed to interpret my resistance to her suggestions as stubbornness or selfishness, rather than legitimate exercise of property owner prerogatives. The frequency and intensity of these disagreements increased gradually over several months. Jessica would propose changes to landscaping, room arrangements, or maintenance priorities that reflected her preferences rather than practical considerations or my own vision for the property. When I explained that such decisions were ultimately mine to make as the property owner, she would express frustration and suggest that I was being unreasonable or controlling. During one particularly tense visit, Jessica mentioned that she and Michael had been discussing the possibility of relocating to Seattle to be closer to our parents. She described this potential move as beneficial for everyone involved, allowing her children to have daily access to their grandparents, while enabling her to provide more direct assistance with household management and parental care. The implications of this proposed relocation were significant and concerning from my perspective. Jessica's presence as a permanent resident would fundamentally alter the household dynamics and potentially create conflicts over decision-making authority and space allocation. More troubling was the suggestion that her relocation would somehow naturally result in shared or transferred responsibility for property management and financial obligations. When I raised questions about how such an arrangement would work practically and legally, Jessica seemed to assume that the details would be resolved through family discussion and mutual agreement rather than formal legal processes. She appeared to expect that I would welcome the opportunity to share the financial burden and household responsibilities, despite the fact that such changes would significantly dilute my ownership rights and control over the property I had worked so hard to preserve. These conversations revealed fundamental differences in how Jessica and I viewed property ownership, family obligations, and individual rights within family relationships. Jessica seemed to operate from a perspective that family members should subordinate individual interests to collective family benefit, particularly when it came to property and financial resources. She appeared to believe that my ownership of the family home was more accurately described as stewardship that should be exercised for the benefit of all family members. My perspective, shaped by the legal realities of property ownership and the substantial personal sacrifices I had made, emphasized the importance of individual rights and the legitimate authority that comes with financial responsibility and legal ownership. I viewed the property as my home and investment, legally and morally earned through my willingness to assume risks and obligations that other family members had been unable or unwilling to accept. The philosophical differences underlying these competing perspectives created increasing tension during family interactions. Jessica began expressing frustration that I was not more collaborative in decision-making processes that she felt should involve the entire family. She seemed to view my insistence on owner prerogatives as evidence of selfishness or lack of family loyalty. During this period, I also began noticing changes in my parents' behavior and attitudes that suggested they were being influenced by Jessica's perspective on the property arrangements. They began asking questions about my long-term intentions for the house and whether I had considered options that would provide greater family involvement in property decisions and management. These questions were concerning because they suggested that Jessica was conducting private conversations with our parents about the property situation and potentially advocating for changes that would benefit her interests at the expense of my ownership rights. The fact that my parents were beginning to question arrangements that had been working successfully for over a year indicated that Jessica was effectively undermining the stability and mutual satisfaction that had previously characterized our living situation. The erosion of family consensus about the property arrangements created emotional stress that affected my relationship with each family member individually and the family dynamic collectively. I began feeling like an outsider in my own home, constantly needing to defend decisions and arrangements that should have been accepted as natural consequences of my ownership status and financial responsibilities. The situation became more complicated when Jessica began involving Michael in discussions about the family property situation. Michael's perspective as an outsider to the family dynamics provided Jessica with validation for her position, while adding another voice advocating for arrangements that would benefit their interests. Michael's background in business management led him to offer suggestions about property management and financial optimization that presumed a level of involvement in decision-making that was not appropriate given his lack of ownership stake or financial contribution. These developments created a coalition of family members who were collectively pressuring me to modify arrangements that had been working effectively and were legally established to protect my interests. The pressure was subtle but persistent, expressed through suggestions, questions, and comments that gradually created an atmosphere where my ownership rights were treated as negotiable rather than established legal facts. The most concerning aspect of this evolving situation was the realization that my family members were beginning to view my substantial financial contributions and personal sacrifices as entitlements they could claim, rather than investments I had made that deserved protection and respect. The gratitude and appreciation that had been expressed during the initial crisis period were being replaced by expectations and demands that reflected a fundamental lack of understanding about property rights and individual autonomy. During this period, I consulted with the attorney who had handled the original property transfer and mortgage arrangements to ensure that my legal position remained secure and to understand my options if family pressure continued to intensify. The attorney confirmed that my ownership rights were properly documented and legally protected, but also warned that family disputes over property could become emotionally and financially destructive, even when legal positions were clear. This legal consultation reinforced my determination to maintain the boundaries and rights that had been established through proper legal processes, while also highlighting the importance of clear communication with family members about the permanence and legitimacy of the arrangements that protected my substantial investment in the property. The attorney also suggested that documenting ongoing contributions and improvements to the property would be prudent for protecting my interests if disputes escalated to legal proceedings. This advice led me to begin maintaining detailed records of all expenses, improvements, and maintenance activities related to the property, creating a paper trail that would demonstrate my continued investment and stewardship if such documentation became necessary. As the second year of the arrangement progressed, the tension between Jessica's expectations and my ownership rights continued to intensify. Her visits became less pleasant and more focused on advocating for changes that would benefit her interests, while diminishing my control over the property and decision-making processes. The collaborative family relationship that had initially characterized our interactions was being replaced by adversarial dynamics that threatened to destroy the family harmony I had worked so hard to preserve. The realization that family members were willing to undermine my legitimate rights and disregard my substantial sacrifices was painful and disillusioning. I began understanding that family loyalty was not reciprocal, and that my commitment to helping family members did not guarantee that they would respect my interests when conflicts arose between collective benefit and individual rights. This growing awareness forced me to reconsider my assumptions about family relationships, and the extent to which I could rely on family members to honor agreements and respect boundaries when their own interests were at stake. The experience was teaching me that protective legal documentation and clear boundary enforcement were necessary even within family relationships, particularly when substantial financial interests were involved. The stage was being set for confrontations that would test every aspect of my character, values, and commitment to protecting the investment and security I had worked so hard to build through my willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for family welfare. The third year of my residence in the family home marked a decisive shift from subtle tension to overt pressure, as Jessica's approach to the property situation became increasingly aggressive and coordinated. What had previously been expressed as suggestions and concerns evolved into a systematic campaign designed to convince me that my continued ownership of the property was somehow detrimental to family welfare, and that transferring control to Jessica would serve everyone's best interests. The campaign began with Jessica scheduling a family meeting during one of her visits, ostensibly to discuss long-term plans for our parents, care and living arrangements. She presented this meeting as a collaborative family planning session, but it quickly became apparent that she had developed specific objectives that required my cooperation and agreement to implement successfully. During this meeting, Jessica presented a comprehensive analysis of what she described as inefficiencies in the current property management arrangements. She argued that my remote work schedule and freelance consulting commitments prevented me from dedicating sufficient attention to property maintenance and improvement projects. She suggested that her experience as a full-time homemaker and her physical presence in Seattle on a more regular basis would enable more effective property management and better care for our aging parents. The presentation was sophisticated and well-prepared, incorporating financial projections, maintenance schedules, and care coordination plans that demonstrated considerable research and planning effort. Jessica had clearly invested substantial time in developing arguments that would appeal to family welfare concerns, while positioning her increased involvement as the logical solution to perceived problems with current arrangements. However, the analysis contained fundamental flaws and misrepresentations that revealed the true nature of Jessica's motivations. She had inflated maintenance costs and understated property improvements I had completed, creating an artificially negative assessment of my stewardship performance. She had also made assumptions about our parents, care needs that were not supported by their actual health status, or expressed preferences about living arrangements. Most concerning was Jessica's proposal for implementing her alternative management approach, which involved transferring significant decision-making authority to her while maintaining my financial responsibility for mortgage payments and major expenses. This arrangement would provide Jessica with the benefits of property control while preserving my obligation to bear the financial burden and legal liability associated with ownership. When I questioned the logic and fairness of this proposed arrangement, Jessica responded by emphasizing family loyalty and collective benefit over individual rights and financial contributions. She argued that my focus on ownership rights and financial investment demonstrated selfishness and failure to prioritize family welfare above personal interests. The emotional manipulation embedded in these arguments was sophisticated and persistent. Jessica consistently framed the situation as a choice between family harmony and individual selfishness, suggesting that my resistance to her proposals demonstrated lack of love and commitment to our parents' well-being. She implied that my insistence on maintaining ownership control was preventing optimal care for our parents and creating unnecessary family conflict. These arguments were particularly effective because they exploited my genuine commitment to family welfare and my desire to maintain harmonious relationships with people I loved. Jessica understood my values and motivations well enough to craft appeals that would create internal conflict and self-doubt about my position and priorities. During this period, Jessica also began building coalitions with other family members by conducting private conversations that presented her perspective on the property situation while minimizing or distorting my contributions and legal rights. She spoke with Thomas about the need for more collaborative family decision-making and the importance of ensuring that our parents received optimal care as they aged. Thomas, who was now established in his legal career and had limited direct knowledge of the day-to-day realities of the property arrangements, was susceptible to Jessica's arguments about family cooperation and shared responsibility. His legal training made him appreciate the importance of proper documentation, but his distance from the situation prevented him from understanding the practical implications of the changes Jessica was advocating. Jessica's conversations with our parents were particularly problematic because they created doubt and concern about arrangements that had been working effectively for over 2 years. She would raise questions about my long-term commitment to maintaining the property and living situation, suggesting that my career development or personal relationships might eventually lead me to abandon the family home and leave our parents in a vulnerable position. These suggestions were particularly insidious because they played on our parents' fears about aging and dependency while undermining their confidence in my reliability and commitment. Jessica presented herself as a more stable and predictable source of support, emphasizing her established family life and her long-term commitment to remaining in the Seattle area. The impact of these conversations became evident through changes in my parents' behavior and attitudes toward the property arrangements. They began asking more frequent questions about my future plans and expressing concerns about what would happen if I decided to move or change careers. They started suggesting that perhaps more family involvement in decision-making would be beneficial, and that Jessica's increased participation could provide additional security for everyone involved. These changes in family dynamics created a hostile environment that made living in the house increasingly stressful and uncomfortable. I found myself constantly defending decisions and arrangements that had previously been accepted without question, and I began feeling like an outsider in what was legally and financially my own home. The psychological pressure was intense and sustained, creating daily stress that affected my work performance, physical health, and emotional well-being. I was experiencing the exhaustion that comes from constant vigilance against manipulation and the anxiety that results from having one's fundamental rights and contributions questioned by people whose opinions matter deeply on a personal level. During this period, I consulted again with my attorney to discuss the legal implications of the pressure campaign and to understand my options for protecting my interests while attempting to preserve family relationships. The attorney explained that while my legal position remained secure, family disputes over property could become extremely costly and emotionally destructive, even when the legal outcome was predictable. The attorney also warned that prolonged family conflict over property could potentially affect my ability to maintain mortgage payments and property upkeep if the emotional stress began interfering with my work performance, or if legal costs became substantial. This advice highlighted the importance of addressing the situation decisively before it escalated to the point where it threatened my financial stability. Armed with this legal perspective, I decided to establish clear boundaries with Jessica regarding her involvement in property decisions and her ongoing pressure campaign. I scheduled a direct conversation with her during her next visit to address the situation explicitly and establish expectations for future interactions. During this conversation, I explained clearly that the property arrangements were legally established and financially sound, and that I had no intention of modifying the ownership structure or decision-making authority that reflected my substantial investment and ongoing financial responsibility. I emphasized that while I welcomed her input and assistance with family care coordination, I would not accept attempts to undermine my ownership rights or create doubt about my commitment to our parents' welfare. Jessica's response to this boundary-setting conversation was revealing and concerning. Rather than acknowledging my legitimate rights or expressing appreciation for my clarification, she became defensive and argumentative, insisting that my position was unreasonable and harmful to family relationships. She argued that property ownership within families should be subject to collective decision-making, and that my insistence on individual rights was contrary to family values and traditions. She claimed that my parents had expressed concerns about my controlling behavior and inflexibility regarding family input on property matters. These claims were particularly troubling because they suggested that Jessica was actively working to damage my relationships with our parents by misrepresenting my reasonable boundary setting as controlling or unreasonable behavior. The fact that she would resort to such tactics indicated that her motivations were not genuinely focused on family welfare, but rather on achieving her personal objectives regardless of the impact on family relationships. The conversation concluded with Jessica making it clear that she would continue advocating for changes to the property arrangements, and that she viewed my resistance as temporary rather than final. She expressed confidence that our parents would eventually support her position, and that family pressure would ultimately convince me to modify my stance. This response demonstrated that Jessica had no intention of respecting the boundaries I had established, or acknowledging my legitimate rights as property owner. Her approach was adversarial and manipulative, designed to wear down my resistance through sustained pressure, rather than to address legitimate concerns through reasonable negotiation and compromise. Following this conversation, Jessica's pressure campaign intensified rather than diminishing. She began scheduling more frequent visits and extending the duration of her stays, creating more opportunities to influence our parents and build support for her position. Her presence in the house became increasingly disruptive to the peaceful routine that I had established with our parents. During these extended visits, Jessica would initiate conversations about property management and family care coordination that consistently undermined my authority and questioned my decisions. She would suggest alternative approaches to maintenance projects, criticize my priorities for property improvements, and raise concerns about my management style that created doubt and confusion for our parents. The cumulative effect of these tactics was to create an atmosphere of constant conflict and uncertainty that made the living situation increasingly untenable. Jessica was systematically destroying the family harmony that I had worked so hard to preserve while pursuing her own agenda for gaining control over property and decision-making authority that she had not earned through financial contribution or legal investment. The realization that Jessica was willing to damage family relationships and create emotional distress for our parents in pursuit of her personal objectives was profoundly disappointing and disillusioning. I began understanding that her concerns about family welfare and parental care were secondary to her desire for control and her sense of entitlement to benefits she had not earned. This recognition forced me to reconsider my approach to family relationships and my willingness to accommodate demands that were fundamentally unreasonable and harmful to my legitimate interests. I realized that my commitment to family harmony had been exploited by someone who did not share the same values or demonstrate reciprocal respect for my contributions and rights. The situation was approaching a critical point where decisive action would be necessary to protect my interests and establish definitive boundaries that could not be undermined through emotional manipulation or sustained pressure campaigns. The foundation was being laid for confrontations that would test my resolve and force me to choose between family approval and personal integrity. The situation reached a critical turning point during Jessica's visit in early December, when she arrived not just for a weekend stay, but with what appeared to be preparations for an extended residence. She brought multiple suitcases, boxes of personal items, and household goods that suggested she intended to establish herself as a permanent occupant rather than a temporary visitor. This dramatic escalation occurred without any prior discussion or agreement from me as the property owner, representing a direct challenge to my authority and legal rights. Jessica's unilateral decision to essentially move into the house created immediate practical problems that demanded urgent resolution. The guest bedroom where she typically stayed during visits was not equipped for long-term residence, and her extended presence disrupted the household routines and personal space arrangements that had been carefully established over 3 years of successful cohabitation with our parents. More significantly, Jessica's behavior during this extended stay demonstrated a complete disregard for my ownership rights and decision-making authority. She began rearranging furniture, reorganizing storage spaces, and making changes to household systems without consultation or permission. These actions represented a deliberate assertion of control that challenged the fundamental premise of my legal ownership and financial responsibility for the property. When I confronted Jessica about her presumptuous behavior and demanded clarification about her intentions and timeline for departure, her response revealed the full extent of her sense of entitlement and her strategic planning for gaining control of the property. She informed me that she and Michael had decided to relocate to Seattle permanently to provide better care for our parents, and that she expected me to accommodate this decision by sharing space and decision-making authority. Jessica's announcement was presented as a fait accompli rather than a proposal for discussion. She had apparently made this major decision without consulting me, despite my status as property owner and primary financial contributor. Her approach presumed that I would simply accept her presence and adapt my living arrangements to accommodate her family's preferences and objectives. The conversation that followed this announcement was perhaps the most revealing exchange we had ever had regarding her true perspective on property rights, family obligations, and individual autonomy. Jessica argued that family property should be managed collectively, and that my individual ownership was less important than family welfare and shared benefit. She claimed that her decision to relocate was motivated by concern for our parents' well-being, and that opposing her presence would demonstrate selfishness and lack of family loyalty. These arguments were sophisticated examples of emotional manipulation designed to exploit my genuine love for our parents, while obscuring the fundamental unfairness of her demands. Jessica was essentially requiring me to surrender control over my own home, while continuing to bear full financial responsibility for mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs. She was proposing to gain all the benefits of property control while accepting none of the financial obligations or legal risks associated with ownership. When I explained that her proposal was financially and legally unworkable, Jessica responded with increased emotional pressure and accusations that I was prioritizing money over family relationships. She suggested that my resistance to sharing the property demonstrated that I had never genuinely cared about our parents' welfare but had used their financial crisis as an opportunity to gain control over family assets for my own benefit. These accusations were particularly painful because they inverted the reality of my substantial sacrifices and genuine commitment to family welfare. Jessica was attempting to reframe my legitimate exercise of property rights as evidence of selfishness while presenting her unreasonable demands as expressions of family loyalty and concern. The psychological manipulation became even more intensive when Jessica began involving our parents directly in the conflict by expressing disappointment and hurt about my unwillingness to accommodate her family's needs. She described her relocation decision as a sacrifice she was making for their benefit, and suggested that my opposition was preventing them from receiving optimal care and support. These tactics were particularly effective because they exploited our parents' natural desire to avoid conflict between their children while playing on their concerns about aging and dependency. Jessica was essentially forcing them to choose sides in a dispute that she had created through her unreasonable demands and manipulative behavior. The emotional toll of this sustained pressure campaign was severe and affected every aspect of my daily life. I found myself living in a state of constant tension and anxiety, never knowing when the next confrontation would occur or what new demands would be presented. The stress interfered with my work performance, disrupted my sleep patterns, and created physical symptoms that indicated the situation was becoming unsustainable from a health perspective. During this period, I also began recognizing the broader pattern of Jessica's behavior and understanding how her current actions reflected long-standing character traits and relationship dynamics that I had previously overlooked or rationalized. Throughout our lives, Jessica had consistently demonstrated a sense of entitlement to benefits and resources that she had not earned, along with a willingness to use emotional manipulation to achieve her objectives. These insights led me to consult with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and manipulation tactics, to better understand the situation and develop strategies for protecting my mental health while navigating the ongoing conflict. The therapist helped me recognize that Jessica's behavior represented a form of psychological abuse designed to wear down my resistance and convince me to surrender rights and resources that she was not entitled to claim. The therapeutic perspective was particularly valuable because it provided objective validation of my position and helped me understand that maintaining boundaries against manipulative family members was not only acceptable but necessary for psychological health and personal integrity. The therapist emphasized that family relationships should be based on mutual respect and reciprocity, rather than exploitation and manipulation. Armed with this professional guidance, I began documenting Jessica's behavior and demands more systematically to create a clear record of the unreasonable nature of her expectations and the manipulative tactics she was employing. This documentation would prove essential if the situation escalated to the point where legal intervention became necessary to protect my interests and property rights. The documentation process also helped me recognize the full extent of Jessica's strategic planning and coordination with other family members to build pressure for achieving her objectives. Her actions were not impulsive or emotional reactions but calculated steps in a comprehensive campaign designed to wear down my resistance and force my capitulation to her demands. Meanwhile, Jessica continued to establish herself as a permanent resident, despite my explicit objections and her lack of legal right to remain on the property. She enrolled her children in local schools, began job searching in the Seattle area, and made other commitments that suggested she had no intention of leaving regardless of my position as property owner. These actions represented a form of adverse possession attempt through family manipulation rather than legal process. Jessica was essentially trying to establish squatters' rights through emotional pressure and family dynamics, while avoiding the legal procedures that would be required for any legitimate claim to property rights or residence privileges. The situation became even more complicated when Michael arrived to join Jessica's occupation of the property, bringing additional belongings and further disrupting the household arrangements. His presence doubled the number of unauthorized occupants and created additional pressure on space and resources while demonstrating that Jessica's family was committed to their occupation strategy regardless of my objections. Michael's involvement also introduced new dynamics to the conflict because his perspective as an outsider to the family relationships provided Jessica with validation and support for her position, while adding another voice advocating for arrangements that would benefit their interests at my expense. His business background led him to offer suggestions about property management and financial optimization that presumed a level of involvement in decision-making that was completely inappropriate given his lack of ownership stake or financial contribution. The combined presence of Jessica's entire family in my home created an environment that was simultaneously hostile and claustrophobic. Every interaction became a potential confrontation, and every decision about household management became an opportunity for them to challenge my authority and question my choices. The psychological pressure was intense and constant, designed to make my continued residence in my own home so unpleasant that I would eventually capitulate to their demands. During this occupation period, Jessica also began making demands about household expenses and financial arrangements that demonstrated her complete lack of understanding or respect for my financial contributions and legal obligations. She suggested that mortgage payments and property taxes should be divided among all residents regardless of ownership status, and that major decisions about property improvements or maintenance should be subject to majority vote rather than owner discretion. These proposals represented fundamental misunderstandings of property law and financial responsibility that would have been laughable if they were not being advanced so aggressively and persistently. Jessica was essentially demanding that I continue to bear legal and financial responsibility for the property while surrendering control over decisions and accepting her family as equal partners in benefits and decision-making authority. The absurdity of these demands was matched only by the intensity with which they were presented and the emotional manipulation used to support them. Jessica continued to frame every aspect of the conflict in terms of family loyalty versus individual selfishness, suggesting that any resistance to her proposals demonstrated lack of love and commitment to our parents' welfare. The situation reached a crisis point when I realized that Jessica's occupation strategy was not temporary, but represented a permanent seizure attempt that would continue indefinitely unless I took decisive action to protect my rights and property. Her behavior demonstrated that she had no intention of respecting boundaries, acknowledging ownership rights, or accepting any outcome that did not provide her with the control and benefits she demanded. This recognition forced me to confront the reality that preserving family relationships was no longer compatible with protecting my legitimate interests and rights. Jessica had created a situation where accommodation and compromise were impossible because her demands were fundamentally unreasonable and her methods were manipulative and abusive. The choice before me was clear: continue to endure psychological abuse and property seizure attempts in the hope of maintaining family harmony, or take decisive action to protect my rights and interests, despite the inevitable damage to family relationships. The decision would test every aspect of my character and values while determining whether I would allow manipulation and exploitation to succeed, or would stand firm in defense of my legitimate rights and investments. The final straw came during what Jessica orchestrated as a family intervention on a cold January evening, when she gathered our parents Thomas and Michael in the living room to present what she described as a comprehensive solution to the ongoing conflict over property arrangements. The meeting was scheduled without my input or consent, representing another example of Jessica's presumption that she possessed authority to make decisions about my home and my relationships with other family members. Jessica had prepared extensively for this confrontation, creating documents that outlined what she characterized as a fair and reasonable redistribution of property rights and responsibilities that would serve everyone's interests, while resolving the tension that had been building over recent months. The presentation was sophisticated and emotionally manipulative, designed to position her demands as reasonable compromises while portraying my resistance as stubborn selfishness that was harming family relationships. The centerpiece of Jessica's proposal involved transferring the property deed into joint ownership among all family members, with decisions about property management, improvements, and financial obligations subject to majority vote rather than individual owner discretion. Under this arrangement, I would retain responsibility for mortgage payments and primary financial obligations while surrendering exclusive decision-making authority and accepting Jessica's family as permanent residents with equal say in household operations. The proposal was presented with charts, financial projections, and legal-sounding language that was designed to create an impression of legitimacy and fairness, while obscuring the fundamental inequity of requiring me to continue bearing financial responsibility without corresponding control over the asset I was supporting. Jessica had clearly invested significant time in crafting arguments that would appeal to family loyalty while minimizing the obvious unfairness of her demands. During the presentation, Jessica systematically addressed each family member individually, appealing to their specific concerns and interests while building a coalition of support for her position. She emphasized to our parents that the proposed arrangement would provide them with greater security and more consistent care through shared family responsibility. She assured Thomas that the legal documentation would be properly structured to protect everyone's interests and prevent future conflicts. Most manipulatively, Jessica framed the entire proposal as a sacrifice she was making for family welfare, describing her willingness to relocate and assume property management responsibilities as evidence of her commitment to our parents' well-being. She portrayed herself as the solution to problems that I had allegedly created through my inflexible and controlling approach to property ownership. The emotional manipulation reached its peak when Jessica directly challenged me to explain why I was opposing arrangements that would benefit our parents and provide them with better care and more family support. She suggested that my resistance demonstrated that I valued money and control more than family relationships and parental welfare, creating a false choice between accepting her demands or being labeled as selfish and uncaring. The psychological pressure in that room was intense and overwhelming. Every person I loved and respected was being asked to judge my character and motivations based on my willingness to surrender rights and resources I had legitimately earned through substantial sacrifice and financial risk. Jessica had created a situation where refusing her demands would be interpreted as evidence of moral failure and lack of family loyalty. However, the months of preparation and professional guidance I had received enabled me to recognize the manipulation tactics being employed and maintain clarity about the fundamental unfairness of what was being demanded. I understood that accepting Jessica's proposal would not resolve the conflict, but would instead reward manipulative behavior while establishing a precedent that would lead to additional demands and further erosion of my rights. My response to Jessica's intervention was measured but firm. I acknowledged everyone's desire for family harmony while explaining clearly why her proposal was unworkable and unfair. I outlined the legal realities of property ownership, the financial risks I had assumed, and the substantial investments I had made that justified my decision-making authority and control over the property. I also addressed the emotional manipulation directly, explaining that family loyalty should be reciprocal, and that genuine concern for family welfare would not require one family member to surrender legitimately earned rights and resources to benefit others who had not made similar sacrifices or investments. I emphasized that my commitment to our parents' well-being was demonstrated through actions rather than words, and that I had consistently prioritized their welfare while managing the property responsibly. The reaction to my refusal was swift and revealing. Jessica immediately shifted from presenting herself as a reasonable negotiator to expressing anger and frustration that I was not accepting what she characterized as a generous and fair compromise. She accused me of being controlling, selfish, and harmful to family relationships, revealing the manipulative foundation underlying her previous appeals to reason and fairness. Our parents appeared confused and distressed by the conflict, clearly uncomfortable with being forced to choose between their children's competing positions. Thomas seemed torn between his legal understanding of property rights and his desire to maintain family harmony. Michael supported Jessica's position, but appeared uncomfortable with the intensity of the emotional manipulation being employed. The meeting concluded with Jessica delivering what amounted to an ultimatum. She declared that she and her family would continue residing in the house regardless of my objections, and that if I was unwilling to accept shared ownership and decision-making, I should consider whether my continued presence was beneficial for family relationships and parental care. She suggested that perhaps I should find alternative living arrangements that would allow the rest of the family to manage the property and care for our parents without interference from my controlling behavior. This ultimatum represented the culmination of Jessica's strategy to force me out of my own home through psychological pressure and emotional manipulation. She was essentially demanding that I abandon the property I owned and financially supported so that she could assume control without legal process or financial contribution. The audacity of this demand was matched only by her apparent confidence that family pressure would force my compliance. The immediate aftermath of this confrontation was a period of intense emotional turmoil as I processed the full extent of Jessica's manipulation and the willingness of other family members to participate in or tolerate her abusive behavior. I realized that the family relationships I had worked so hard to preserve had been fundamentally damaged by Jessica's actions, and that continuing to accommodate her demands would not restore harmony, but would instead encourage additional exploitation. That night, I made several critical phone calls that would determine my response to Jessica's ultimatum and establish clear boundaries that could not be crossed without serious consequences. The first call was to my attorney, explaining the current situation and requesting immediate legal action to establish my exclusive right to determine who could reside on my property and under what conditions. The attorney confirmed that Jessica's extended residence without my consent constituted trespassing, and that her refusal to leave after being asked to depart provided legal grounds for formal eviction proceedings. The legal documentation establishing my ownership was clear and indisputable, providing strong foundation for protecting my rights through judicial process if necessary. The second call was to a locksmith, scheduling service to change all exterior locks on the property to ensure that I maintained exclusive control over access and could prevent unauthorized entry by individuals who were attempting to seize control through occupation and manipulation rather than legal means. The third call was to a security company, arranging for installation of a comprehensive monitoring system that would document any attempts at unauthorized access or property damage that might occur if the situation escalated to the point where Jessica's family attempted to force their way back onto the property. These preparations represented a decisive shift from attempting to manage the conflict through family discussion and compromise to protecting my rights through legal means and security measures. I recognized that Jessica's behavior had made peaceful resolution impossible, and that protecting my interests would require firm action backed by legal authority. The following morning, I informed Jessica that she and her family needed to vacate the property within 72 hours or face formal eviction proceedings. I explained that their continued residence without my consent constituted trespassing, and that I would no longer tolerate attempts to seize control of my property through manipulation and unauthorized occupation. Jessica's reaction was explosive and revealed the true extent of her sense of entitlement and her inability to accept that her manipulation tactics had failed. She accused me of destroying the family, abandoning our parents, and prioritizing property over relationships. She threatened to contact authorities about what she characterized as elder abuse, claiming that forcing her to leave would endanger our parents' welfare and safety. These threats represented desperate attempts to maintain control through intimidation and false accusations when emotional manipulation had proven insufficient. Jessica was essentially threatening to weaponize social services and law enforcement against me if I insisted on exercising my legitimate property rights and refusing to accommodate her unreasonable demands. However, the months of documentation and professional guidance had prepared me for such escalation tactics. I had maintained detailed records of my parents, excellent care, and my responsible property management, along with evidence of Jessica's manipulative behavior and unreasonable demands. Any investigation would quickly reveal the true nature of the situation and the manipulative foundation underlying Jessica's accusations. The 72-hour deadline I had established created urgency that forced Jessica to confront the reality that her occupation strategy had failed, and that continued resistance would result in legal consequences she was not prepared to face. The professional locksmith and security installation services I had scheduled demonstrated my commitment to protecting my rights and property, regardless of family pressure or emotional manipulation. During this final confrontation period, I also had direct conversations with our parents to explain my position and reassure them that Jessica's departure would not affect their living arrangements or care. I emphasized that my commitment to their welfare had never wavered, and that protecting my property rights was necessary for maintaining the stability and security that enabled me to continue supporting them. These conversations were difficult but necessary for ensuring that our parents understood the true nature of the conflict and recognized that my actions were motivated by legitimate self-protection rather than lack of care or family loyalty. I wanted them to understand that preserving my ownership rights was essential for maintaining my ability to provide them with long-term security and support. The breaking point had arrived, and I was prepared to take decisive action to protect everything I had worked so hard to build and preserve, regardless of the family relationships that might be damaged by my refusal to surrender to manipulation and exploitation. The morning following my ultimatum to Jessica marked the beginning of the most challenging and empowering period of my entire journey. As I prepared to enforce the boundaries I had established, I experienced a profound transformation in my relationship with personal power and my understanding of what genuine self-advocacy required. The decision to prioritize my legitimate rights over family approval represented a fundamental shift in my identity, from someone who sought harmony at any cost to someone who recognized that true peace required protecting the foundation that made generosity and care possible. Jessica's initial response to the 72-hour departure deadline was to ignore it entirely, behaving as though my ultimatum was merely another negotiating tactic that could be overcome through continued pressure and manipulation. She maintained her normal routine within the house, directing her children's activities, coordinating meal preparations, and engaging with our parents as though nothing had changed. This deliberate disregard for my clearly stated boundaries represented a calculated test of my resolve and commitment to following through on the consequences I had established. The psychological challenge of maintaining firm boundaries while observing Jessica's defiant behavior was intense and required constant reinforcement of my decision through reflection on the principles and values that justified my position. I recognized that any wavering or accommodation at this critical juncture would be interpreted as weakness and would encourage additional boundary violations that would make future enforcement even more difficult. During this period, I maintained detailed documentation of Jessica's continued presence and behavior, creating a comprehensive record that would support legal proceedings if voluntary compliance could not be achieved. The documentation included photographs of her belongings throughout the house, records of her daily activities, and evidence of her children's continued enrollment in local schools, all of which demonstrated her intention to establish permanent residence despite explicit instructions to vacate. The locksmith arrived precisely as scheduled on the second day of the deadline period, professionally changing all exterior door locks and providing me with exclusive control over access to the property. This action represented a tangible assertion of my ownership rights and created a practical mechanism for enforcing the boundaries I had established. The installation process was conducted efficiently and courteously, with the technician treating the situation as a routine security upgrade rather than a family conflict resolution measure. Jessica's reaction to discovering the changed locks was immediate and explosive. She demanded explanations, accused me of illegal behavior, and insisted that preventing her access to the house violated her rights as a family member and our parents' needs for her assistance and support. Her outrage revealed the extent to which she had assumed that family relationships provided her with automatic entitlements that superseded legal property rights and individual autonomy. The confrontation that followed was perhaps the most honest exchange Jessica and I had ever experienced, as the veneer of concern for family welfare and parental care was stripped away to reveal the fundamental sense of entitlement and manipulation that had driven her behavior throughout the conflict. She openly admitted that she viewed my ownership of the property as temporary stewardship that should be subject to family oversight and collective decision-making. When I explained that property ownership carried both rights and responsibilities that could not be separated, and that my financial obligations required corresponding decision-making authority, Jessica became increasingly agitated and accusatory. She claimed that my position demonstrated selfishness and lack of family loyalty, while her demands represented reasonable expectations for shared family resources and collaborative care arrangements. This conversation provided crucial insight into Jessica's fundamental worldview regarding individual rights, family obligations, and resource distribution. She appeared to believe that successful family members had moral obligations to share their achievements and resources with less successful relatives, regardless of the personal sacrifices or legitimate processes through which those achievements had been earned. The philosophical differences underlying our conflict extended far beyond property arrangements to encompass fundamental questions about personal autonomy, individual responsibility, and the proper balance between family loyalty and self-preservation. Jessica's perspective prioritized collective benefit and shared resources, while my position emphasized individual rights and the importance of protecting legitimate investments and achievements. The security system installation occurred on the third day of the deadline period, providing comprehensive monitoring capabilities that would document any attempts at unauthorized access or property interference. The professional installation team worked efficiently and discreetly, treating the project as a standard residential security upgrade while providing me with sophisticated tools for protecting my property and documenting any escalation in the conflict. As the 72-hour deadline approached its conclusion, Jessica made several attempts to negotiate extensions or modifications that would allow her family to remain on the property under different terms or conditions. These proposals invariably involved arrangements that would provide her with continued benefits while requiring me to accept reduced control or increased financial obligations, demonstrating that she remained committed to achieving her objectives through persistent negotiation, rather than accepting the legitimacy of my position. My response to these negotiation attempts was consistent and unwavering. I explained that the deadline was firm and non-negotiable, that continued residence without my consent would result in formal legal action, and that I would no longer engage in discussions about property arrangements that did not recognize my exclusive ownership rights and decision-making authority. The final hours before the deadline expired were marked by intensive pressure from multiple family members who had been contacted by Jessica to advocate on her behalf. Thomas called to suggest that legal action would damage family relationships permanently, and that some form of compromise should be possible if all parties approached the situation with flexibility and good faith. Our parents expressed confusion and distress about the conflict, requesting that I reconsider my position in the interest of family harmony and their own comfort with having Jessica nearby to provide assistance and companionship. Their appeals were emotionally difficult to resist because they reflected genuine concern about losing family connections and support systems that had become meaningful to them. However, the months of preparation and professional guidance had equipped me with the clarity and resolve necessary to maintain my position despite these emotional appeals. I understood that compromising my boundaries at this critical moment would not resolve the underlying conflict, but would instead reward manipulative behavior while encouraging additional demands and boundary violations. When the 72-hour deadline expired without voluntary compliance, I contacted my attorney to initiate formal eviction proceedings against Jessica and her family. The legal process was straightforward given the clear documentation of ownership, the explicit request for departure, and the continued unauthorized occupancy despite reasonable notice to vacate. The formal legal action created immediate consequences that Jessica had apparently not anticipated, despite repeated warnings about the seriousness of my position. The service of legal documents made the conflict official and created a public record that could not be dismissed as a private family disagreement or negotiating tactic. Jessica's response to receiving eviction papers was to escalate her own tactics by contacting social services to report what she characterized as elder abuse and neglect. Her complaint alleged that forcing her departure would endanger our parents' welfare and that my controlling behavior demonstrated unfitness for caring for elderly relatives who required family support and supervision. This escalation to false accusations represented a desperate attempt to use governmental authority to achieve objectives that could not be accomplished through family pressure or legal occupation tactics. Jessica was essentially trying to weaponize social services against me in retaliation for my refusal to surrender to her demands and manipulation attempts. However, the extensive documentation I had maintained throughout the conflict provided comprehensive evidence of my parents' excellent care and my responsible property management. Social services investigators quickly determined that the allegations were unfounded, and that our parents were receiving appropriate care in a safe and well-maintained environment. The investigation process, while stressful and time-consuming, ultimately vindicated my position and provided official validation that my property management and parental care met all legal standards and professional expectations. The investigators' report documented the quality of care being provided, while noting the absence of any evidence supporting Jessica's allegations of abuse or neglect. More importantly, the investigation revealed to our parents the extent to which Jessica was willing to damage family relationships and create governmental interference in their lives in pursuit of her personal objectives regarding property control. They began recognizing that her claims about concern for their welfare were inconsistent with actions that subjected them to invasive investigations and public scrutiny. During this period, I also received unexpected support from Thomas, who had initially advocated for compromise but gradually recognized the manipulative nature of Jessica's behavior and the unreasonableness of her demands. His legal training enabled him to understand the property law issues involved and to appreciate the legitimacy of my position regarding ownership rights and boundary enforcement. Thomas's support was particularly valuable because it provided family validation for my position and helped our parents understand that the conflict was not simply a disagreement between siblings, but rather a legitimate defense of property rights against unreasonable demands and manipulative behavior. The formal eviction process proceeded efficiently through the court system, with Jessica's attorney unable to present any viable defense against the clear evidence of unauthorized occupancy and the property owner's explicit request for departure. The legal proceedings were conducted professionally and respectfully, focusing on property law issues rather than the underlying family dynamics that had created the conflict. The court's ruling was unambiguous and comprehensive, establishing my exclusive right to determine who could reside on my property and ordering Jessica's immediate departure with all personal belongings. The judgment also included provisions for law enforcement assistance if voluntary compliance was not achieved within the specified time frame. Jessica's final departure from the property was accomplished under the supervision of sheriff's deputies, who ensured that the court order was executed peacefully and completely. The law enforcement presence eliminated any possibility of dramatic confrontations or attempts to create additional conflict during the removal process. The physical act of watching Jessica and her family load their belongings into moving vehicles was both satisfying and melancholy, representing the successful defense of my rights while acknowledging the damage that had been done to family relationships. I felt proud of my courage in standing firm against manipulation and exploitation, while also grieving the loss of family connections that had once provided meaning and support. The immediate aftermath of Jessica's departure brought a profound sense of relief and restored peace to the household that had been disrupted by months of tension and conflict. Our parents expressed surprise at how much calmer and more comfortable the living environment became once the constant pressure and manipulation tactics were removed from their daily experience. The weeks following Jessica's court-ordered departure brought a period of profound transformation that extended far beyond the immediate relief of having restored peace and order to my household. The successful defense of my property rights had established important precedents and provided valuable lessons about personal strength, family dynamics, and the complex relationship between individual autonomy and collective responsibility that would influence every aspect of my future decision-making and relationship management. The immediate practical benefits of Jessica's departure were evident throughout the house. The constant tension and anxiety that had characterized daily life during her occupation were replaced by a calm stability that allowed both my parents and myself to return to the routines and relationships that had worked effectively before the conflict began. The shared spaces that had been disrupted by unauthorized rearrangement and overcrowding were restored to their optimal configurations for comfortable cohabitation between three adults who respected each other's needs and boundaries. My parents experienced the positive changes in household atmosphere perhaps more dramatically than anyone else involved in the situation. They had been subjected to months of emotional manipulation and pressure to take sides in a conflict they had not created and could not resolve through their own actions. The removal of this constant stress enabled them to return to enjoying their home environment and their relationship with me, without the overlay of guilt and tension that Jessica's presence had created. During the first month after the resolution, my parents and I had several important conversations about the experience and what they had learned about family dynamics and relationship management through observing the conflict and its resolution. They expressed genuine appreciation for my willingness to stand firm against unreasonable demands and manipulation tactics, recognizing that my actions had protected not only my own interests, but also their long-term security and comfort. These conversations revealed that my parents had been more aware of Jessica's manipulative behavior than they had initially acknowledged. They had felt uncomfortable with many of her demands and tactics, but had been reluctant to oppose her directly because of their concerns about creating additional family conflict and their natural desire to avoid taking sides between their children. The successful resolution had validated their instincts, while providing them with confidence that supporting reasonable boundaries was beneficial rather than harmful to family relationships. The legal victory had established clear precedents that would prevent similar conflicts in the future, while demonstrating to all family members that property rights and individual boundaries would be respected and enforced when necessary. The court documentation created an official record that validated my position and provided protection against future attempts to challenge my ownership or decision-making authority through emotional manipulation or social pressure. Perhaps most importantly, the experience had transformed my understanding of my own capabilities and my relationship with personal power and authority. The successful navigation of intense family pressure, legal proceedings, and emotional manipulation had proven to myself and others that I possessed the courage and competence necessary to protect my legitimate interests, even when doing so required accepting temporary conflict and disapproval from people whose opinions mattered deeply to me. This newfound confidence influenced every aspect of my personal and professional relationships moving forward. I became more assertive in workplace negotiations, more selective about personal commitments that might compromise my well-being, and more willing to establish clear boundaries in all relationships, rather than accepting unreasonable demands in the interest of maintaining superficial harmony. The professional growth that resulted from successfully managing this complex personal situation also enhanced my effectiveness in my nonprofit career. The skills I had developed in documentation, legal research, strategic planning, and conflict resolution proved valuable in addressing organizational challenges and advocating for program improvements that benefited the communities we served. The experience also deepened my understanding of manipulation tactics and emotional abuse patterns, knowledge that proved valuable both personally and professionally. I became more skilled at recognizing when individuals were attempting to exploit guilt, family loyalty, or professional obligations to achieve objectives that were not reasonable or fair. This awareness helped me respond more effectively to such tactics while maintaining my own integrity and protecting my legitimate interests. The financial benefits of successfully defending my property rights were substantial and long-lasting. The mortgage payments I had been making for 3 years had built significant equity that would continue growing as property values increased and the loan balance decreased through regular payments. The improvements I had made to enhance the property's condition and functionality had increased its market value while creating a more comfortable and efficient living environment for current residents. More significantly, the experience had established my credibility as a property owner and financial manager, creating opportunities for future real estate investments and business ventures that might not have been available without the demonstrated track record of successful property management and legal sophistication. The skills and knowledge I had acquired through necessity had developed into valuable competencies that could be applied to other opportunities and challenges. The relationship with Thomas had been strengthened through the conflict as he gained deeper appreciation for my position and witnessed my handling of complex legal and family dynamics with professionalism and integrity. His support during the later stages of the conflict had been valuable both practically and emotionally, and his legal expertise had provided useful guidance for navigating the court system and understanding my rights and options. Thomas expressed genuine respect for my courage in standing firm against family pressure, and my competence in managing the legal proceedings without compromising my values or damaging relationships unnecessarily. He acknowledged that his initial preference for compromise had been based on incomplete understanding of Jessica's behavior and unreasonable demands, and he credited me with teaching him important lessons about the necessity of protecting legitimate rights, even when doing so created temporary family discord. The extended family reactions to the conflict and its resolution were mixed but generally supportive once the facts became clear through official documentation and legal proceedings. Several relatives who had initially been sympathetic to Jessica's claims about family cooperation and shared resources recognized the manipulative nature of her tactics once they understood the extent of my financial contributions and legal rights regarding the property. These family members expressed appreciation for my willingness to help our parents during their financial crisis and respect for my determination to protect the investment I had made in their welfare. They acknowledged that Jessica's demands had been unreasonable and that my response had been measured and appropriate given the circumstances and her refusal to accept reasonable boundaries. The professional relationships I had developed with attorneys, mediators, and counselors during the conflict provided an ongoing network of resources and expertise that proved valuable for addressing future challenges and opportunities. These professionals had witnessed my handling of complex personal and legal issues with maturity and competence, creating opportunities for referrals and collaborations that enhanced both my personal development and professional effectiveness. The therapeutic work I had undertaken to understand family dynamics and manipulation tactics had equipped me with tools and insights that improved all of my relationships and enhanced my ability to maintain healthy boundaries while building meaningful connections with people who shared similar values and demonstrated mutual respect. The investment in professional guidance had proven worthwhile, both for resolving the immediate crisis and for developing long-term capabilities that would serve me throughout my life. The community relationships that had been maintained throughout the conflict had provided important support and perspective during difficult periods. Neighbors, colleagues, and friends had observed my handling of family pressure and legal challenges with dignity and professionalism, reinforcing their confidence in my judgment and character. These relationships became even more valuable after the resolution, as they provided validation and encouragement for the difficult decisions I had made. The personal growth that resulted from successfully navigating this challenging period had transformed my approach to goal setting and achievement in all areas of life. I had discovered that I possessed reservoirs of strength and determination that I had not previously recognized or tested. The confidence gained through defending my rights and interests against intense pressure had encouraged me to pursue more ambitious objectives and accept greater challenges in both personal and professional contexts. The experience had also refined my understanding of the difference between genuine family loyalty and exploitation disguised as family obligation. True family relationships were based on mutual respect, reciprocal support, and recognition of individual autonomy and rights. Relationships that required one party to surrender legitimate interests or accept unfair treatment were not healthy family dynamics but rather exploitative arrangements that ultimately harmed all parties involved. This distinction became a guiding principle for evaluating all personal relationships and determining the appropriate level of investment and accommodation in various social and family contexts. I learned to distinguish between reasonable requests for assistance or flexibility and unreasonable demands that required me to compromise my well-being or legitimate interests for the benefit of others who were not willing to make similar sacrifices or show similar consideration. The ripple effects of successfully managing this family conflict extended into every area of my life, creating opportunities for growth and achievement that would not have been possible without the confidence and capabilities developed through necessity during the crisis period. The young woman who had initially moved into the family home to help during a financial emergency had evolved into a competent property owner, skilled legal advocate, and confident individual who understood her rights and possessed the courage to protect them when necessary. The foundation that had been tested and strengthened through adversity provided a solid base for building an even more meaningful and successful future, one that would honor the lessons learned while creating new opportunities for contribution and achievement. The months that followed the resolution of the property conflict marked a period of intentional reconstruction and strategic development that would establish the foundation for long-term success and fulfillment. Having successfully defended my rights and interests against sustained family pressure, I recognized the opportunity to build something even more meaningful and substantial from the secure base that had been preserved through principled action and professional guidance. The immediate priority involved restoring and enhancing the family relationships that had been strained during the conflict, while maintaining the boundaries and principles that had proven essential for protecting my interests and well-being. This delicate process required careful communication and consistent demonstration of my continued commitment to family welfare, without surrendering the autonomy and decision-making authority that had been legitimately earned through substantial sacrifice and investment. My relationship with our parents experienced significant improvement, as the stress and manipulation tactics that had characterized Jessica's occupation were replaced by the respectful cooperation and mutual appreciation that had characterized our interactions before the conflict began. They expressed genuine relief at having their home environment restored to peaceful stability, while acknowledging that my firm stance had ultimately protected their long-term security and comfort, as well as my own legitimate interests. These conversations with my parents provided valuable insights into their perspective on the conflict and their understanding of the family dynamics that had created the crisis. They revealed that they had been uncomfortable with many of Jessica's demands and tactics, but had felt powerless to oppose her directly, without risking damage to their relationship with their grandchildren, or creating additional family discord that might have negative consequences for everyone involved. The parents acknowledged that my willingness to accept temporary conflict and family disapproval in defense of reasonable boundaries had actually served their interests by preventing the establishment of precedents that would have encouraged additional unreasonable demands and manipulative behavior. They recognized that accommodating Jessica's initial demands would have created expectations for continued accommodation that could have ultimately threatened the stability and security of the living arrangement that had been working effectively for all parties involved. This understanding led to explicit agreements about future decision-making processes and family involvement in property-related matters that would prevent similar conflicts while preserving appropriate channels for input and collaboration on issues that affected all household members. The agreements established clear distinctions between decisions that required my approval as property owner and those that could be made collectively through household discussion and consensus. The professional development opportunities that emerged from successfully managing this complex personal and legal situation proved substantial and enduring. The competencies I had developed in legal research, conflict resolution, strategic planning, and boundary management were immediately applicable to challenges and opportunities in my nonprofit career that had previously seemed beyond my capability or authority to address effectively. My enhanced confidence and demonstrated ability to navigate complex stakeholder relationships while maintaining clear principles and objectives led to increased responsibilities and recognition within my organization. Colleagues and supervisors who had observed my handling of personal challenges with professionalism and integrity expressed greater confidence in my ability to manage sensitive organizational issues and represent the nonprofit in challenging negotiations or advocacy situations. The legal knowledge and documentation skills I had acquired through necessity during the property conflict proved valuable for addressing organizational compliance issues and developing policies and procedures that protected both the nonprofit and the communities we served. My experience with contract review, regulatory research, and stakeholder communication enhanced my effectiveness in program development and implementation activities that required sophisticated understanding of legal and administrative requirements. The strategic thinking capabilities that had been developed through managing multiple competing interests and complex family dynamics during the conflict translated directly into improved effectiveness in organizational planning and resource allocation decisions. I became more skilled at analyzing stakeholder motivations, anticipating potential conflicts, and developing solutions that balanced multiple objectives while protecting organizational interests and mission objectives. The property management experience gained through maintaining and improving the family home had also developed practical skills and knowledge that created opportunities for additional income and professional development. I began offering consulting services to other individuals who were navigating complex family property situations or considering real estate investments that involved multiple stakeholders or challenging circumstances. These consulting opportunities provided supplemental income while allowing me to apply the lessons learned through my own experience to help others avoid similar conflicts or navigate them more effectively when they could not be prevented. The work was personally fulfilling because it enabled me to transform my own difficult experience into valuable assistance for others facing comparable challenges. The real estate investment knowledge and experience gained through managing the family property had also opened opportunities for personal wealth building that would provide long-term financial security and independence. The successful management of one property had demonstrated my capability for handling additional real estate investments that could diversify my income sources and create passive revenue streams that would support future goals and objectives. The equity that had been building in the family property through regular mortgage payments and strategic improvements represented a substantial asset that could be leveraged for additional investments or business ventures when appropriate opportunities arose. The demonstrated track record of responsible property management and successful conflict resolution had established credibility with lenders and investment partners that would facilitate future transactions and collaborations. The personal relationships that had been maintained or developed during the conflict period had created a network of professional contacts and supportive individuals who recognized my competence and character through direct observation of my behavior under pressure. These relationships proved valuable for both personal support and professional opportunities that emerged as my career and investment activities expanded beyond their original scope. The therapeutic and legal professionals who had provided guidance during the conflict had become ongoing resources for addressing new challenges and opportunities with greater sophistication and effectiveness. Their expertise remained available for consultation when complex situations arose that could benefit from professional perspective and guidance based on experience with similar circumstances. The community relationships that had been preserved throughout the conflict provided important social support and validation that reinforced my confidence in the decisions I had made and the principles I had maintained. Neighbors, colleagues, and friends who had witnessed my handling of family pressure with dignity and professionalism expressed respect for my courage and competence, while offering continued support for future endeavors and challenges. The extended family relationships that had been tested during the conflict had generally emerged stronger and more authentic, as relatives gained clearer understanding of my character and values through observing my response to unreasonable demands and manipulative behavior. Family members who had initially been uncertain about supporting my position came to recognize the legitimacy of my stance and the appropriateness of my response to Jessica's tactics. These family relationships became more meaningful and sustainable because they were based on accurate understanding of my boundaries and expectations rather than assumptions or misunderstandings that could create future conflicts. The crisis had provided an opportunity to establish clear communication patterns and mutual understanding that would prevent similar problems while preserving the positive aspects of family connection and support. The spiritual and philosophical growth that had resulted from navigating this challenging period had also transformed my approach to life decisions and relationship management in ways that extended far beyond the specific circumstances of the property conflict. I had developed deeper understanding of personal values and priorities that would guide future choices about career development, relationship investment, and resource allocation. The experience had reinforced my commitment to principles of fairness, reciprocity, and mutual respect in all relationships, while teaching me to recognize and respond effectively to manipulation tactics and exploitative behavior patterns. This knowledge had enhanced my ability to build healthy relationships with individuals who shared similar values, while protecting myself from those who might attempt to take advantage of my generosity or commitment to family and community welfare. The confidence gained through successfully defending my legitimate interests against intense pressure had encouraged me to pursue more ambitious goals and accept greater challenges in all areas of life. I recognized that the strength and determination I had discovered within myself during the crisis were available for addressing other obstacles and opportunities that might require similar courage and persistence. The financial literacy and investment knowledge that had been developed through necessity during the property management experience had created opportunities for building long-term wealth and security that would provide independence and options for future contributions to family and community welfare. The understanding of real estate markets, legal processes, and risk management had established a foundation for continued growth and achievement that would benefit not only myself but also others who might depend on my support or guidance. The leadership capabilities that had emerged through managing complex stakeholder relationships and maintaining clear principles under pressure had prepared me for increased responsibilities and influence in both professional and community contexts. The demonstrated ability to make difficult decisions while maintaining integrity and achieving positive outcomes had established credibility that would facilitate future opportunities to contribute to meaningful projects and initiatives. The period of rebuilding and moving forward had established a solid foundation for continued growth and achievement that honored the lessons learned while creating new possibilities for contribution and fulfillment. The young woman who had initially moved into the family home to help during a crisis had evolved into a confident and competent individual, with the knowledge, skills, and character necessary to build an exceptional future, while maintaining the values and relationships that provided meaning and purpose to her efforts. The successful resolution of the family property conflict had established a foundation of personal credibility and professional competence that created opportunities for expanded influence and achievement, extending far beyond the original circumstances. The demonstrated ability to navigate complex stakeholder relationships while maintaining principled positions under intense pressure had attracted attention from individuals and organizations seeking leadership and expertise in challenging situations requiring sophisticated judgment and unwavering integrity. The first significant opportunity emerged through my nonprofit work when the executive director approached me about leading a major organizational restructuring initiative that would require managing competing interests among board members, staff, funding partners, and community stakeholders. The project involved consolidating 3 smaller nonprofits into a more efficient and effective regional organization capable of delivering enhanced services while reducing administrative overhead and operational redundancy. The complexity of this assignment required precisely the skills and experience I had developed through managing the family property situation. Multiple stakeholders possessed legitimate but conflicting interests that needed to be balanced through careful negotiation and strategic planning. The legal and financial implications required thorough analysis and documentation to ensure compliance with regulatory requirements while protecting all parties involved. Most importantly, the project demanded the ability to maintain clear principles and objectives despite pressure from various groups seeking outcomes that would benefit their particular interests at the expense of overall organizational effectiveness. The nonprofit consolidation project provided an opportunity to apply the lessons learned about boundary setting, stakeholder management, and conflict resolution in a professional context, where success would create substantial benefits for the communities served while advancing my career development and establishing my reputation as a capable organizational leader. The executive director had specifically selected me for this assignment based on observations of my handling of complex personal challenges with professionalism and competence. The initial phase of the consolidation project required extensive research and analysis to understand the financial position, operational capabilities, and stakeholder relationships of each organization involved in the merger. This work demanded the same attention to detail and systematic documentation that had been essential for protecting my interests during the property conflict. The skills developed through necessity during the family crisis proved directly applicable to ensuring that all relevant information was properly gathered and analyzed before making strategic recommendations. The stakeholder engagement process revealed the same patterns of competing interests and emotional manipulation that had characterized my family situation, though expressed through professional rather than personal relationships. Board members from each organization advocated for arrangements that would preserve their influence and preferred programs, while potentially compromising overall efficiency and effectiveness. Staff members expressed concerns about job security and role changes that reflected legitimate professional interests, while sometimes conflicting with optimal organizational design. The funding partners presented their own requirements and preferences that needed to be incorporated into the consolidation planning, while maintaining mission focus and community benefit. Government agencies imposed regulatory constraints that limited options while ensuring appropriate accountability and transparency. Community organizations expressed expectations about service delivery and accessibility that required careful consideration during the restructuring process. Managing these multiple competing interests required the same strategic thinking and principled decision-making, that had enabled successful defense of my property rights against family pressure. The ability to distinguish between legitimate concerns that deserved accommodation and unreasonable demands that would compromise organizational effectiveness proved essential for developing consolidation plans that served all stakeholders appropriately while achieving the primary objectives of improved efficiency and enhanced service delivery. The negotiation skills developed through managing family conflict proved invaluable for facilitating discussions among stakeholders who possess strong opinions and significant emotional investment in particular outcomes. The experience of maintaining calm professionalism while addressing intense pressure and emotional manipulation had prepared me for similar challenges in the organizational context, where personal and professional relationships intersected with substantial financial and programmatic implications. The legal knowledge and documentation practices that had been essential for protecting my property rights provided a foundation for ensuring that the nonprofit consolidation complied with all regulatory requirements while establishing clear agreements among the participating organizations. The importance of proper legal structure and comprehensive documentation had been proven through personal experience and was immediately applicable to the organizational restructuring process. The consolidation project achieved remarkable success through careful planning, inclusive stakeholder engagement, and unwavering commitment to principles of transparency, fairness, and mission effectiveness. The restructured organization began operations with stronger financial resources, enhanced operational capabilities, and broader community support than any of the original organizations had possessed individually. The improved efficiency enabled expanded service delivery while reducing per-unit costs through economies of scale and elimination of duplicated administrative functions. The professional recognition resulting from this successful organizational leadership experience created additional opportunities for consulting and advisory roles with other nonprofits facing similar challenges or seeking to improve their operational effectiveness. The demonstrated ability to manage complex stakeholder relationships while achieving measurable improvements in organizational performance established credibility within the nonprofit sector that generated referrals and invitations to participate in other significant projects. The consulting work provided supplemental income while enabling application of the skills and knowledge developed through both personal and professional experiences to help other organizations navigate challenging transitions and resolve conflicts that were impeding their effectiveness. Each consulting engagement reinforced the lessons learned about stakeholder management, strategic planning, and principled leadership, while expanding expertise in different organizational contexts and community settings. The real estate investment activities that had been made possible through successful property management of the family home also expanded during this period, as increased income and demonstrated competence created access to larger and more complex investment opportunities. The credibility established through responsible management of one property had attracted potential partners and lenders interested in collaborating on additional projects that could generate substantial returns while contributing to community development. The first additional real estate investment involved partnering with two other investors to purchase and rehabilitate a small apartment building in an emerging neighborhood where property values were increasing due to infrastructure improvements and economic development initiatives. The project required substantial capital investment and sophisticated project management to coordinate renovations while maintaining tenant relationships and ensuring compliance with housing regulations. The apartment building renovation project provided an opportunity to apply the property management skills developed through maintaining the family home, while expanding expertise in contractor coordination, tenant relations, and regulatory compliance. The successful completion of this project generated positive cash flow while building equity that could be leveraged for additional investments. More importantly, the project established a track record of successful real estate investment management that would facilitate access to larger and more profitable opportunities. The expanded real estate investment activities also created opportunities to mentor other individuals who were interested in building wealth through property investment, but lacked the knowledge or confidence to begin on their own. The mentoring relationships provided personal satisfaction while generating additional income through advisory fees and partnership opportunities with investors who brought capital while relying on my expertise for project identification and management. The community leadership opportunities that emerged from the nonprofit consolidation success and real estate investment activities provided platforms for contributing to local economic development and social welfare initiatives that aligned with personal values while building professional relationships with other influential community members. Service on nonprofit boards and community planning committees created opportunities to apply skills and knowledge while expanding networks and influence within the regional business and civic community. The professional development that resulted from these expanded responsibilities and opportunities reinforced the confidence and competence that had been developed through successfully navigating the family property conflict. Each new challenge provided opportunities to apply lessons learned while developing additional capabilities that enhanced effectiveness and created access to even greater opportunities for contribution and achievement. The financial security that resulted from diversified income sources and growing real estate equity provided independence and options that had not been available during the initial crisis period, when helping family during their foreclosure emergency had required substantial personal sacrifice and financial risk. The ability to make decisions based on principles and long-term objectives rather than immediate financial pressures created freedom to pursue opportunities that offered meaningful contribution rather than simply adequate compensation. The personal relationships that had been strengthened through the conflict resolution process continued to provide support and encouragement, while expanding to include new connections with individuals who shared similar values and demonstrated mutual respect for boundaries and individual autonomy. The network of professional and personal relationships created opportunities for collaboration and mutual support that enhanced effectiveness while providing meaningful social connections. The knowledge and experience gained through managing complex challenges had also created opportunities to contribute to the success of others facing similar situations through formal and informal mentoring relationships. The ability to provide guidance based on personal experience rather than theoretical knowledge proved valuable for individuals navigating family conflicts, property investments, or organizational leadership challenges, where practical wisdom and emotional support were more important than technical expertise alone. The transformation from someone who had initially moved into the family home simply to help during a financial emergency into a respected community leader and successful entrepreneur demonstrated the potential for growth and achievement that could result from principled responses to challenging circumstances. The foundation established through defending legitimate rights and interests had created opportunities for expanded contribution and influence that honored the lessons learned while creating new possibilities for meaningful achievement and service to others. The successful resolution of the family property conflict had established a foundation of personal credibility and professional competence that created opportunities for expanded influence and achievement extending far beyond the original circumstances. The demonstrated ability to navigate complex stakeholder relationships while maintaining principled positions under intense pressure had attracted attention from individuals and organizations seeking leadership and expertise in challenging situations, requiring sophisticated judgment and unwavering integrity. The first significant opportunity emerged through my nonprofit work, when the executive director approached me about leading a major organizational restructuring initiative that would require managing competing interests among board members, staff, funding partners, and community stakeholders. The project involved consolidating 3 smaller nonprofits into a more efficient and effective regional organization capable of delivering enhanced services while reducing administrative overhead and operational redundancy. The complexity of this assignment required precisely the skills and experience I had developed through managing the family property situation. Multiple stakeholders possessed legitimate but conflicting interests that needed to be balanced through careful negotiation and strategic planning. The legal and financial implications required thorough analysis and documentation to ensure compliance with regulatory requirements while protecting all parties involved. Most importantly, the project demanded the ability to maintain clear principles and objectives despite pressure from various groups seeking outcomes that would benefit their particular interests at the expense of overall organizational effectiveness. The nonprofit consolidation project provided an opportunity to apply the lessons learned about boundary setting, stakeholder management, and conflict resolution in a professional context where success would create substantial benefits for the communities served, while advancing my career development and establishing my reputation as a capable organizational leader. The executive director had specifically selected me for this assignment based on observations of my handling of complex personal challenges with professionalism and competence. The initial phase of the consolidation project required extensive research and analysis to understand the financial position, operational capabilities, and stakeholder relationships of each organization involved in the merger. This work demanded the same attention to detail and systematic documentation that had been essential for protecting my interests during the property conflict. The skills developed through necessity during the family crisis proved directly applicable to ensuring that all relevant information was properly gathered and analyzed before making strategic recommendations. The stakeholder engagement process revealed the same patterns of competing interests and emotional manipulation that had characterized my family situation, though expressed through professional rather than personal relationships. Board members from each organization advocated for arrangements that would preserve their influence and preferred programs, while potentially compromising overall efficiency and effectiveness. Staff members expressed concerns about job security and role changes that reflected legitimate professional interests, while sometimes conflicting with optimal organizational design. The funding partners presented their own requirements and preferences that needed to be incorporated into the consolidation planning, while maintaining mission focus and community benefit. Government agencies imposed regulatory constraints that limited options while ensuring appropriate accountability and transparency. Community organizations expressed expectations about service delivery and accessibility that required careful consideration during the restructuring process. Managing these multiple competing interests required the same strategic thinking and principled decision-making that had enabled successful defense of my property rights against family pressure. The ability to distinguish between legitimate concerns that deserved accommodation and unreasonable demands that would compromise organizational effectiveness proved essential for developing consolidation plans that served all stakeholders appropriately, while achieving the primary objectives of improved efficiency and enhanced service delivery. The negotiation skills developed through managing family conflict proved invaluable for facilitating discussions among stakeholders who possess strong opinions and significant emotional investment in particular outcomes. The experience of maintaining calm professionalism while addressing intense pressure and emotional manipulation had prepared me for similar challenges in the organizational context, where personal and professional relationships intersected with substantial financial and programmatic implications. The legal knowledge and documentation practices that had been essential for protecting my property rights provided a foundation for ensuring that the nonprofit consolidation complied with all regulatory requirements while establishing clear agreements among the participating organizations. The importance of proper legal structure and comprehensive documentation had been proven through personal experience and was immediately applicable to the organizational restructuring process. The consolidation project achieved remarkable success through careful planning, inclusive stakeholder engagement, and unwavering commitment to principles of transparency, fairness, and mission effectiveness. The restructured organization began operations with stronger financial resources, enhanced operational capabilities, and broader community support than any of the original organizations had possessed individually. The improved efficiency enabled expanded service delivery while reducing per-unit costs through economies of scale and elimination of duplicated administrative functions. The professional recognition resulting from this successful organizational leadership experience created additional opportunities for consulting and advisory roles with other nonprofits facing similar challenges or seeking to improve their operational effectiveness. The demonstrated ability to manage complex stakeholder relationships while achieving measurable improvements in organizational performance established credibility within the nonprofit sector that generated referrals and invitations to participate in other significant projects. The consulting work provided supplemental income while enabling application of the skills and knowledge developed through both personal and professional experiences to help other organizations navigate challenging transitions and resolve conflicts that were impeding their effectiveness. Each consulting engagement reinforced the lessons learned about stakeholder management, strategic planning, and principled leadership, while expanding expertise in different organizational contexts and community settings. The real estate investment activities that had been made possible through successful property management of the family home also expanded during this period, as increased income and demonstrated competence created access to larger and more complex investment opportunities. The credibility established through responsible management of one property had attracted potential partners and lenders interested in collaborating on additional projects that could generate substantial returns while contributing to community development. The first additional real estate investment involved partnering with two other investors to purchase and rehabilitate a small apartment building in an emerging neighborhood where property values were increasing due to infrastructure improvements and economic development initiatives. The project required substantial capital investment and sophisticated project management to coordinate renovations while maintaining tenant relationships and ensuring compliance with housing regulations. The apartment building renovation project provided an opportunity to apply the property management skills developed through maintaining the family home while expanding expertise in contractor coordination, tenant relations, and regulatory compliance. The successful completion of this project generated positive cash flow while building equity that could be leveraged for additional investments. More importantly, the project established a track record of successful real estate investment management that would facilitate access to larger and more profitable opportunities. The expanded real estate investment activities also created opportunities to mentor other individuals who were interested in building wealth through property investment but lacked the knowledge or confidence to begin on their own. The mentoring relationships provided personal satisfaction while generating additional income through advisory fees and partnership opportunities, with investors who brought capital while relying on my expertise for project identification and management. The community leadership opportunities that emerged from the nonprofit consolidation success and real estate investment activities provided platforms for contributing to local economic development and social welfare initiatives that aligned with personal values while building professional relationships with other influential community members. Service on nonprofit boards and community planning committees created opportunities to apply skills and knowledge while expanding networks and influence within the regional business and civic community. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.